My name is Jason Wallace. I'm the pastor of Christ Presbyterian Church here in the Salt Lake Valley, and we welcome you to another installment of the Ancient Paths. Our church meets Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. at 8630 West, 2700 South. That's Main Street, Magna, here in the Salt Lake Valley. If you're looking for a church with biblical preaching and simple reverent worship, we invite you to worship with us soon. We also have a mission work in Logan, Utah that meets at 6:30 p.m. in the Faith and Fellowship Center, which is at 1315 East 700 North. The subject that we've been dealing with for the past couple of weeks has been atheism. And I wanted to try to tie those loose ends up this evening, but before we move into that, I wanted to invite you to join us this Friday. We have a debate at the University of Utah in the Orson Spencer Hall Auditorium. I'm going to be debating Martin Tanner, the host of KSL Radio's Religion Today. We're going to be debating the subject of whether the Bible accords with LDS Scripture. We're going to be seeing, do the LDS Scriptures present something just simply in addition to what the Bible says, or is it going to be something that is actually contrary to it? The positive position is going to be taken by Mr. Tanner that the LDS Scriptures do accord with the Bible, and I'm going to be taking the negative. It's going to be a simple, respectful, moderated debate. We've done some of these before. We've been complimented even by LDS. We have some LDS that call us wanting to know when we're going to have another debate because they enjoy in this politically correct culture actually having an opportunity to hear people who strongly disagree with each other and yet who do it in a respectful manner. It's regrettable that we live in this time where it seems as if people either feel they have to keep their mouths shut or sugarcoat everything. And then we have people who are going the other extreme and ranting and raving at people. We believe that we can discuss these things that are very important to both of us and have very strong disagreements. Honestly, what you'll hear is that we believe that according to the Bible, the LDS position presents a different God and a different gospel, and that it's going to lead to outer darkness. On the other hand, Mr. Tanner will say that he believes that what we hold to is false. Yet we're going to be discussing respectfully. Mark and I have done debates before, and we've known each other for several years now. So anyway, I hope you'll be able to make it to that. That's this Friday at 7 p.m. The admission's free. And if you'd like more information on that, you can go to our website, www.christpres.net. Well, the subject that we have been dealing with is atheism. And the episode that we had last week, it's not yet up on the website. The previous one is, and the other one should be on, Lord willing, by tomorrow. But we titled the last episode, Atheism, A Leap of Faith. And it was an interview with Joel Layton, the president of the Atheist of Utah. And I think that we saw that their position is not really the rational position they claim it is. Rather, it is a leap of faith. And that they are not consistent with their own stated presuppositions. Rather than being the rational position they think it is, it's actually an irrational position. I think that explains some of the almost fundamentalist fervor that we hear from a lot of atheists today. They basically argue like the people they ridicule. They believe that something is true because they say it's true, and anyone who would question them is an idiot. And they don't engage people. They don't actually try to defend their positions. I appreciate that Mr. Layton was very gracious in our conversation. But there are many atheists who are not that gracious. They denigrate anyone who disagrees with them. But I think that we did hear that even from his position, there were some things that would be of great concern to us. He argued that religious instruction of children should be considered by the state a form of child abuse. And we tried to flesh that out a little bit. We talked about how he makes moral judgments, things like this, and we're going to flesh a little bit more of this out tonight. But one of the things that was asserted was that Adolf Hitler was a Christian. And I was a bit stunned that someone would assert that. But unfortunately, so much of what you hear in argumentation these days is nothing more than gratuitous assertions. People say something's true and they put the burden on someone else to disprove it. Well, I pulled up a number of quotes that were written down by Adolf Hitler's secretary, and they were published in a book in 1953 entitled Hitler's Table Talk. And it's basically a journal of things that were written down by his private secretary. And though he used Christian images and Christian language in some of his propaganda, he also used Teutonic images as well. He used things from Hinduism, he used things from Darwinism. But what was Hitler's real view of Christianity? We were told last week that Hitler was a Christian. Well, let's look at some of the quotes from Hitler himself about the Christian faith. He says, "National Socialism and religion cannot exist together." He said, "The heaviest blow that ever struck humanity was the coming of Christianity. Bolshevism is Christianity's illegitimate child. Both are inventions of the Jew. The deliberate lie in the matter of religion was introduced into the world by Christianity." He says, "Christianity is a rebellion against natural law, a protest against nature. Taken to its logical extreme, Christianity would mean the systematic cultivation of the human failure. The reason why the ancient world was so pure, light, and serene was that it knew nothing of the two great scourges, the pox and Christianity. Christianity is an invention of sick brains. One could imagine nothing more senseless nor any more indecent way of turning the idea of the Godhead into a mockery. When all is said, we have no reason to wish that the Italians and Spaniards should free themselves from the drug of Christianity. Let's be the only people who are immunized against the disease. It would always be disagreeable for me to go down to posterity as the man who made concessions in this field. I realize that man in his imperfection can commit innumerable errors, but to devote himself deliberately to errors, that is something I cannot do. I shall never come personally to terms with the Christian lie. Our epoch in the next 200 years will certainly see the end of the disease of Christianity. My regret will have been that I couldn't behold its demise." So this is the kind of argumentation, unfortunately, that we see from the atheist side. Hitler was a Christian. Christianity is at the root of all his crimes, and yet he hated Christianity. The facts do not support what was being claimed. In the same way, they tried to portray the Crusades as if Muslims were just simply minding their own business, living in the Near East, and a bunch of Christians decided one day, we're going to go and we're going to start killing them all. They ignore the fact that the Muslims came from Arabia. They conquered all of the ancient Near East. They conquered the Near East. They came across North Africa. They crossed over at Gibraltar and conquered all of Spain, and they invaded France. And it was only Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, who was able to turn them back and begin what became known as the Reconquista. They began to take back the areas that the Muslims had taken away from the old Roman Empire. And they saw themselves as the heirs of these things. It was one empire that had pressed in on another, and then the other one starts pressing back. But they don't talk about the details. Of course there was great sin in the Crusades. Of course there have always been things that have been wrapped in Christian or religious guise. But to say that this is some bloodthirsty thing that comes out of religion, and Christianity in particular, is just a farce. And we're going to deal with some of the philosophical and other arguments on this as well. But I wanted you to see that when you hear an assertion, Hitler was a Christian, don't take someone's assertion at face value. Research it for yourself. Actually, more properly, you need to ask people, prove it. Prove that he was a Christian. And let's look at the other side. Let's look at the arguments. Yes, Hitler used Christian language in some of his public speeches, just like some of our politicians on both sides of the aisle do now. And how many of them do you think are actually committed to the Christian religion in any historic Orthodox way? So, at any rate, well, we have back with us this week Mr. Mark Howsam. Mr. Howsam is a ruling elder in our congregation. He is finishing his PhD from the University of Wales. Will be soon defending his dissertation there. He is an adjunct member of the philosophical faculty down at Utah Valley University, and also is currently teaching at Salt Lake Community College. He's been teaching morals and ethics and philosophy and a number of different things, and so it's a great privilege to have him back with us. I wanted him to come back and look at how do we understand an atheist worldview? What are the problems with it? What are the arguments from Christians against atheism? Look at the bad arguments, the arguments we shouldn't make, and then also what are the good arguments? And so, Mark, very good to have you back with us.
Thank you.
Now, I think if people go back and watch the episode from last week, if they didn't see it, I think that they'll see that there were two basic issues that Mr. Layton had difficulty with. One was he ascribed value to his wife, which I'm thrilled to see. He did not take a nihilistic position that there is no value in anything. He assigned value to his wife, but he couldn't consistently argue from his worldview that she had any value other than the fact he valued her. So there wasn't any absolute to that. Mm-hmm. There was nothing any more morally compelling than me saying, I love my dog, in my opinion. And the other thing that we'll flesh out in a moment, but the other is that in terms of some of his basic understanding of how do we know the things we know, he assumes that there must be a naturalistic explanation for everything. He assumes that there must be a cause for everything, and yet not an uncaused cause, or the unmoved mover, as it's sometimes called in philosophy. There's not a God who is the cause of everything. So, let's take these one at a time. In terms of the moral argument, you teach ethics. Do you think that an atheist can have a consistent worldview and claim to have a moral system? I mean, obviously atheists claim to have a moral system, but do you believe that it's consistent for them to argue they have one from their worldview?
No, I would say not. I think it's essential to the concept of ethics and morality that we distinguish ethics from prudence, for example. That prudence, looking out for my own interests, doing what's smart to make myself happy in life, that's always been considered, and I think rightly so, fundamentally different from the concept of ethics, of what is actually, how ought I to live, what is it my duty to do, the concept of intrinsic value in human life, for example. Atheism, as far as you grant that it can be consistent with anything in existence, which I would disagree with, but if you grant atheists the existence of the universe and themselves and things like that, still they cannot go beyond prudence with regard to things, because there's no objective valuer, there's no being who is the source of value in the universe, whose perspective can provide value. Really, human beings and all life are simply really electrochemical machines that are just more complicated than other chemicals in the universe. I mean, we're really no different qualitatively than a galaxy or a rock or anything like that. And really nothing matters in an objective sense. So the only reason an atheist can be motivated to care about anything or do anything consistently would be simply out of mere prudence. That this satisfies my desires, and as you said, I think it's really no qualitatively different than I love my dog, or I love my sock puppet for that matter, or whatever. I love my pet rock. It so happens that human beings are going to be more inclined towards loving other human beings to some degree on a limited basis, but there's no qualitative objective difference.
One of the arguments that I have heard made is that this is by having this moral system, it brings the greatest good to society, and that this should be readily apparent to everyone out there what is best for society.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that that is historically tenable, that that is an obvious conclusion, that there is some moral standard that's obvious to everyone?
You mean from an atheist perspective?
Yeah, I mean, well, atheists will sometimes claim this,
Mm-hmm.
that there's this...
A utilitarian kind of
Right.
concept that we are, that the good of society is the ultimate basis of value. Yeah. Well, for one thing, it's very difficult to determine what's the best for all of the universe. We just don't have the depth of knowledge to be able to make those kinds of determinations. There's too many factors in the world. So I think that's kind of a weak position ultimately. And secondly, it's unclear to me why in an atheist view you would care about society as a whole. I mean, you can, some people might be more sympathetic than others, but I think very few people, if they're honest, have just a welling up natural sympathy for the entire human race indiscriminately, with total equality, objectively, and especially when you add to that the belief that people are really electrochemical machines. Doesn't help.
I think it's hilarious that it's often a dodge, really, when you get down to what these people are really thinking. People will say, oh, I love humanity. Mm-hmm. And yet you find they can't stand people.
Yeah, that's right.
And so
it's a tunnel vision that people have. They have to say that because if they don't have a foundation in their own sympathy for humanitarian impulses, they can't get it anyplace else. And so a lot of times I think atheists convince themselves that they have these sympathetic concerns because they have no other basis.
I think, what I observe in so much of atheistic argumentation is not only that there are just gratuitous assertions, an assertion without any evidence, any basis, it's just put out there and it's supposed to be accepted on the face value of it. Not only in like claiming that Hitler was a Christian, or trying to use the bombing of the World Trade Center as this is what religion brings you. Mm-hmm. We've looked at what atheism brings you. We're going to flesh that out a little bit more historically. Atheism brought the Soviet Union. It brought the gulags. It brought the Cultural Revolution in China. It brought the killing fields of Cambodia. But they try to divorce themselves, and they don't have a basis on which to do so.
Yeah.
But I mean, their gratuitous assertion is, obviously this is the good. But how can you tell what is good apart from God saying what is good?
I don't think you can in an objective sense. You can't. There's no objective basis for value, and even in a limited perspective of well, I love humanity or something like that. Again, it's difficult to draw that kind of conclusion. It's not even clear that atheism would lead to the common good in that way, even on atheist principles. And some atheists would argue that religion actually is been built into us by evolution as a way of giving us a sense of morality so that we don't kill each other. The God gene. So it's not even clear among atheists that atheism is good for the common good.
And yet you hear this fundamentalist atheism. The title of our show this evening is An Atheist Theocracy. This is the bugaboo that they want to put up, the alternative to atheism being a theocracy. Mm-hmm. And yet, really, they have their own theocracy, don't they? That they're trying to impose on everyone else.
Sure.
We heard it in terms of the religious instruction. We see it in terms of trying to have any kind of religion, anything that smacks of religion in any way, expunged from the classrooms and things like this. Mm-hmm. I wanted to, we've talked about the more recent examples of this, but I think there's a great example in the French Revolution of this same kind of thinking. And I'm not just trying to demonize them by saying this is this, but in the Reign of Terror that followed the overthrow of the monarchy, people were arguing these same kinds of positions that we hear today, weren't they?
Yeah, I think there definitely is a fundamental similarity. That religion is irrational. It's the cause of evil. Monarchy is connected to religion. And so since it's so dangerous, it's difficult, especially if you have no ultimate moral foundation, to avoid the conclusion that, why not use power to control it, wipe it out? Did you see on the Expelled movie that came out recently, the quote, Bill Maher in terms of saying, if there's one thing we should regulate, some people say we should regulate guns, some people say, what was the other thing you mentioned? I can't remember, but and he said, but if there's one thing we should regulate or keep control over, it's religion as a source of evil and danger in the world. So yeah, definitely, I think that this argument is very similar.
Yeah, we see in the French Revolution that the Christianity was seen as a counter-revolutionary force, and therefore had to be opposed at every turn. And you see in the early days that the devout revolutionaries would not have their children baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, but rather they would have them baptized in the name of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Yeah. And with they tried to overthrow everything. They remade the calendar. They did away with the 7-day week because integral to a 7-day week is the Sabbath. And so they came up with a 10-day week. They renamed all the months. They got rid of the traditional dating because that is Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, A.D., as people know it today. That's supposed to be dating from the time of Christ. They dated everything from the dissolution of the monarchy and the establishment of the republic. And they proclaimed freedom, but the freedom that was actually brought about by many of them was a slavery. I mean, there was no freedom of religion as far as Hébert and some of the others were concerned. Chaumet, I think I'm messing up. It's been a while since I took French. The pronunciation's a little rough, but the things that they brought about during this time period between about 1793 and 1801 with the rise of Napoleon was they deported or executed thousands of clergy, both Catholic and Protestant. They closed, desecrated, and pillaged churches. By act of their assembly, they did away with all names that had the word saint in it, because there were many things, like named for in Monopoly, St. Charles Place.
Especially in a Roman Catholic country,
right?
Previously Roman Catholic.
They destroyed. There was an organized state-sponsored destruction of crosses, bells, and other external signs of worship. The large-scale destruction of religious monuments. The outlawing of public and private worship. And just like we heard from Mr. Layton, there was a law against religious education of your children because it was considered to be backwards. And from October 21st, 1793, any of the clergy or anyone who gave them shelter that had not sworn allegiance to the atheistic rule, there were deists in the mix as well, but the ones that had not sworn allegiance to the ones closing the churches had been closed several months prior, they were to be killed on sight. And one of their crowning achievements was that Hébert and Chaumet took an actress, and they were atheists, but they wanted a personification of reason. And so they took her to Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, put her on the altar there, put a candle beside her because reason is the light of the world, and worshipped her as the goddess Reason, and rededicated Notre Dame Cathedral as the temple of reason. And you basically, a little different from the picture, you had a naked actress put on the altar there in Notre Dame Cathedral. I don't want to be reactionary, but it's as if I'm seeing this same revolutionary spirit springing up around us in people like Richard Dawkins. I mean, even in the election yesterday, you had John Lewis, congressman from Georgia, calling it a revolution. And he's not just talking about in a limited facet, but there are people who see this as the throwing off of the yoke of Christianity and a new reason that's going to save us all.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, I mean, and Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, I mentioned Dawkins, but Sam Harris, another prominent modern atheist, has written a book called The End of Faith. The premise of his writings is basically that religion is dangerous, it's evil, we need to stop tolerating it, basically. Now, he's not calling explicitly for, a persecution of Christians, although it, I think it's kind of lurking behind the scenes there, not too far, not too deep probably, but certainly at least a lot less toleration than has been given. And certainly it's kind of this paranoia, that religion is evil, religion is dangerous, it's going to destroy the world. If we allow religious people, as long as they exist in this world, then we're in danger of nuclear war and disaster. And I mean, basically, we're leading to the destruction of the universe, I mean, as far as he's concerned. And so it's certainly some of that same kind of concern that fueled the French Revolution.
Yeah, and they actually tried to make the national religion what they called the cult of reason.
I think you see that today too. The Center for Inquiry is an organization that's dedicated to secularism, secular values. They have representation. They try to influence the government in Washington and have represented the United Nations also. But they, explicitly say the government needs to base its policies on science, reason, evidence, by which they mean naturalism, and not on ancient books that can't tell us what we need to know. A medieval worldview that's been outdated. We should instead base it on the secular thinking, and I think we saw that at the debate recently too. In the name of neutrality, there's this emphasis on our view of reason is what has to be the standard that everybody has to act by in society.
Yeah, and it's, to me, disingenuous, because when they say we're not going to let religion come into the argument, then in essence it's almost as like they're saying, well, in order to be inclusive of everyone who holds different views, let's do away with the concept of truth. Let's do away, I think we can make real progress if we just do away with the concepts of good and evil. And yet they're inconsistent in that. What they have is a faith. They have their own creation myth, which I think if you haven't seen you've seen it, but if people in the audience haven't seen the movie that's just come out on DVD by Ben Stein, Expelled, it's really well done.
Yeah.
It has a few, nitpicking parts to it, but as far as overwhelmingly well done. When they ask atheists, Darwinians, so how did life begin? Which is the question I asked Joel Layton. They don't know. They know that somehow you go from inorganic matter to a cell. Yep. And for Darwin, the cell was not that complicated a thing. And the question is asked, if a cell was a mud hut to Darwin, what is it now that we have the tools to be able to understand it better? And this guy says, a galaxy. And this former Stanford professor and a number of other things that's making the statement.
It's well accepted that that's the case.
Yeah, I mean,
On all
the
sides.
DNA from a single cell, if stretched out, would be, what, about 3 feet long?
Even more than that.
If all the DNA in your cells was stretched end to end, it would go to like the moon,
Yeah.
or the moon and back. I
Yeah,
forget.
I think it's the moon and back, actually. It's quite a lot.
And you know, the complexities of it all, the little things going on in cells, not just DNA, as if that's not wondrous enough, but all the other things. They have this leap of faith that we don't know how it happened. We have no real explanation, but we know it happened this way. And they have a system of morals that they're trying to impose on other people. I mean, that's been made clear. Religious instruction is to be outlawed, and it has been elsewhere. It is an exclusivist position. They love to demonize religion as if religion alone is exclusivist. The argument was made by David Keller in your debate that religion should be excluded from any political discussion because it is non-egalitarian. But they believe anyone who disagrees with them is a fool. I mean, one of the signs that you see held up in the Expelled debate, or the Expelled film, is a protest of people trying to argue science curricula. And this woman's holding up a sign that says, "You evolved, but not enough." And so they have a creation myth, they have a system of ethics that is based on religious presuppositions. They have all the various. They have their own martyrs. They have their priesthood, which honestly I believe is public education system, and in particular the high priest in the universities. I mean, it is, and if you want to see their dedication, their zeal, question them. Simply ask them to give a rational basis for their positions, and they freak out.
Yep.
I mean, it's the caricatures of someone screaming heresy, you know, heretic, burn the heretic. We see it when scientists point out that Darwinism doesn't work. When they point out that Darwinism, I mean, the Darwinism of Stephen Jay Gould is not the Darwinism of Charles Darwin. And when people point out that it's not sustainable, it doesn't make sense. It's that as a system, there are logical problems, like the very basis of it, survival of the fittest. But then you define the fittest by those that survive, and so it's a tautology, as Philip Johnson argues in Darwin on Trial. Philip Johnson, professor of law at University of California, Berkeley, he critiques it from a simple logical basis, that it's not science, it doesn't predict anything, and it's not falsifiable. It's not, in true science, you can make the argument that at sea level, pure water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you can falsify that. You can go to sea level and try to boil water, and if it boils at 210 degrees, then you know that the hypothesis was incorrect. But there's no falsification. It's a religion, it's not science. But I mean, do you believe that that this is really science, or do you believe that it is a religion of science?
Yeah, I think it's certainly the creation story of a worldview, of a naturalistic worldview. It's held in such a way as to avoid falsification, in the sense that, I mean, it could be falsifiable. I mean, to talk about evolution through natural selection, you know, there are ways you could test it, but the problem is, of course, it tends to fail those tests. Yeah. And so, but usually all that happens is it's just adjusted. Well, if this didn't, if we don't find the fossil the way we wanted it to find, well, I guess we'll just have to adjust our view of how evolution occurred. But now we know how it occurred. If the cell's more complex than we thought, well, I guess Darwinian natural selection's more, Darwinism is more amazing than we thought it was. It just gets adjusted every time so that nothing can really falsify it.
Well, we've got a few callers, and I want to open up the phone lines. If you'd like to join the conversation, the phone number here is 973-TV20. That's 973-8820. If you're on hold, we'll be getting to you in just a moment. But I wanted to ask you first, we've had some phone calls, and you've heard plenty of arguments against atheism. What are the bad arguments against atheism?
Unfortunately, sometimes the worst arguments are ones that are used most frequently. I think arguments from religious experience this is what atheists think, that all of us are always arguing. And these are the worst kinds of arguments, and unfortunately theists reinforce this sense, saying, well, I know that God exists because He's manifested Himself to me, and I have this experience where I just know that He's true because I can feel His presence in my heart, or I have a good feeling about Him, or even just kind of this intuitive emotionalism. The world's so pretty, how could God not exist? I think those kinds of things have a tendency to, they're bad arguments. They're easy to knock down, and atheists love them because they make religious people look stupid.
In their view, it's like someone saying they took LSD and they had a giant pink bunny appear to them.
It's a perfectly legitimate response. I agree with the atheists on that. It's a very valid response. It's not an argument.
What about the argument you can't disprove God?
Yeah, that's another one. Most atheists don't claim to try to disprove God. They don't need to. If they can show that God is not evidenced in the creation, if they can show that Paul was wrong, for example, in saying that you can know the Creator through the things that are made, then they don't need to disprove God. They've made Him irrelevant to the same degree that fairies or hobgoblins.
Michael Schwimmer talks about I can't disprove the God of the Bible, but I can't disprove Allah, Buddha, or the flying spaghetti monster.
Yeah, and you can't. Bertrand Russell, the atheist philosopher, one of the most famous in the 20th century, talked about an orbiting teapot. If there's a teapot orbiting Pluto, for example, we might. How are you going to disprove that? Or maybe make it even better, maybe a planet in some distant galaxy. You can't disprove it, but that doesn't mean there's a good reason to believe it.
Well, we're going to look at some of the good arguments in just a moment, but I want to go ahead and take some of our phone calls. We have Douglas with us from Murray. Douglas, good to have you with us this evening. Douglas?
Hello?
You're on the air. Douglas? We're apparently having some difficulties with Douglas. Sorry about that. We have with us Jason from North Salt Lake. Jason, good to have you with us. Jason? Jason? I can hear him breathing.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello?
I can't hear you.
Can you go ahead with your question?
All right, really quick here about atheism, because I've been trying to get on the show for the last 2 weeks when that guy was on there. As I have to listen to you through the TV, so I know when to answer. Anyways, I didn't start hearing atheism until I was about, back in the 90s. And anyways, they used to sit there and say that, the Bible was fake and all this, and that it doesn't exist, and, it was a big fairy tale. And then years later, I run into some of these atheist people, because some of them were my friends, like 10, 12 years later. Now they're going around saying, okay, Jesus did exist, but we don't know why he's so popular. Well, why don't you read the book? It's so dumb. And my other thing is, this thing on evolution, honestly, I think we did have some type of evolution, but not Darwin. For instance, over in Iran, they claim that they have the body of Noah, and he's 10 feet tall. I think we were taller as human beings, and we lived longer. We lived like, 200-300 years? And if evolution is for real, then why is it that the monkey has not evolved? What about the turtle and the alligator and all that? And they go back as far as dinosaur years. Why have they not evolved? And number three, the supernova thing. The supernova had to have been alive, because look how it created everything perfectly, like the Earth and all the atoms and matter and everything, and the human beings. It had to have been alive. And if atheism is not an organized religion, then why are they themselves getting organized and becoming a religion? And, you know, they are. They're becoming a religion. They say they don't believe in organized religion, but now they're getting buildings. Now they look like temples, and, you know, they're going around with their philosophy just like an organized religion. And I think the reason why people follow this atheists is because they were burned with so many trends. I mean, look at all the trends that came out. I mean, you look back in the 1990s, you look at aliens and astrology and yoga and psychics and
Jason.
Buddha and all this other garbage that came out. And I think it's burned a lot of people because they can't spiritually fulfill people's needs. So they, you know, they get burned and they don't trust it no more. So they, you know, I don't like organized religion because it's going to burn me like all these other trends burn me and stuff. But, you know, that's all I got to say.
All right. Well, Jason, thank you for calling. You know, he covered so many different bases there. I don't know that we can really devote much time to it, but, you know, I think that he makes some good points. That there's a video out called The Privileged Planet. Was done by a professor out of Iowa State.
Yeah, that was Gonzalez.
He was denied tenure because of it. But he points out that it is amazing that everything is just so balanced. If the Earth was slightly closer to the sun or slightly further away, if it was tilted slightly differently, if it was all these different things, life would not be sustainable here. And, you know, we go back to Romans 1 that it is clear from the creation that there is a God. We know there's a God. Now, in our sin, we suppress that truth, but everyone knows there's a God. You don't have, atheists are not neutral, and you'd have to convince them of something that they wouldn't know otherwise. They know there's a God, but they suppress that. We're going to go ahead and take one more call here before we flesh out some more things. We have with us Ray from Provo, or maybe from Salt Lake. They changed the statement there. Ray, good to have you with us. I think we're having some technical difficulties.
Hi, Jason. I feel like I'm talking to you through the television. I don't hear you on the phone, but I can hear you through the TV, so I hope this works out.
Just run with it. We're having some technical difficulties. My apologies.
I want to say that you kind of let me down just a little bit in your argument with this fellow the last 2 weeks. I feel like you could have done a much better job presenting the scientific evidence. You know, so many things. Going back to what you were just saying, that the sun was much larger millions of years ago, would have been prohibitive to life on the planet. The position of our moon, the way that it provides tides, so many scientific evidences, the perfect 23-degree angle of our planet to give equal distribution of light to both hemispheres. I mean, if you want to hit this guy with science, which is what his God is, you could have hit him between the eyes in both programs repeatedly. But also, I would have gone to the prophetic nature of our book that we worship. I mean, our God is prophetic, and you could have hit him between the eyes again with that. You could have devoted one hour 1 week to one and 1 hour the next week with the other. The prophetic supernatural evidence of God and His Word. But I would basically say this: how is it that they believe that all life came from some primordial slime leading to all plant life and animal life? Do I have that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, that's what they believe.
It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I got to tell you, his faith is much greater than mine.
That was actually the point we made last week. That atheism is a leap of faith.
Well, if you ever bring him back, I hope you a little more ammo on them.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the call. I hope you understand that because of our time constraints, there's only so much that we can cover at one time. And in terms of the arguments from the perfect balance of nature, I think that these are important arguments. But honestly, the way that atheists deal with them is simply to say, well, if things weren't so balanced, then there wouldn't be life for us to be even asking this question. So it's not as if there's life on all these other possibilities. They argue that these are the conditions that are necessary for life, and therefore it takes life, and it takes life for these questions to be asked. And so they just disregard them. And in terms of prophecy, what they do is what they've been doing for hundreds of years. They take a book like Daniel, which is a book that is very clear in its prophecies, a book that lays out the collapse of the Babylonian Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire, the collapse of the Medo-Persians to the Greeks, the collapse of the Greeks to the Romans. It names the Greeks that at the time Daniel was writing were fairly insignificant on the world stage, and lays out the rise and fall of Alexander the Great in great detail. The ram with the one horn, which it says is Greece. It doesn't leave you to speculate, who is this, who might this be. It's not in anything like this. It says this is Greece, and the picture that is given is of a ram with one horn, and that one is broken off, and then four more spring up, and it's the division of the empire among his generals. So how does an atheist deal with that kind of prediction? How does he deal with the predictions of Jesus? Two ways. One is he ignores them. The other is that he then claims that these were things written after the fact, and many critics have claimed that Daniel was written after the fact, despite the evidence otherwise. And they argue that it was written actually probably in the mid-2nd century BC, because then the events that were laid out would be more could be understood in hindsight. So they have their responses to these things, and it's good to ask them. But there's only so much that we can cover at one time, and I think it's important when they are making so many ethical arguments, when they're claiming that they have a system that is reasonable, a system that is free from religious dogma and things like this, to show the fact that their system is inconsistent and it's untenable. And I think this is the issue that is most at hand right now. So I think there is a validity in these things. We're going to actually be dealing with Darwinism in future weeks. But I'm sorry that you feel that I've disappointed you in some way. I think that if you look at the broader context of the debates that are taking place, you'll find that these subjects that we have covered are right at the very heart of them. Well, Mark, I've asked you some of the bad arguments. You can't disprove God. I've had an experience, and you're supposed to trust my experience. Now, we don't deny that there is an internal witness of the Spirit. We are transformed. The Spirit bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. There is an internal subjective witness. We don't deny that that God is there and you can't disprove Him. But these are not the arguments you want to make to someone who's denying the existence of God. What arguments would you want to make?
I think that the Apostle Paul, like we mentioned last week briefly, the Apostle Paul spells out the basic claim, which is that God is known through the things that are made. We know that the eternal power and divine nature of God has been clearly seen through the things that have been made, so they're without excuse. And a lot of the history of Christian, and if you're just talking about God in general, Jewish and Islamic argumentation has followed and fleshed that out, has followed that line of thinking, and showed in a number of different ways how God can be deduced from the world. I mean, God can be deduced from any fact in the world. He can be deduced from the very concept of existence. for example, I mean, in this world that we live in, we have all these different things in the world, and they are all caused by something else. I mean, everything in the world it comes into being. It's caused by some previous causes. We're all in time going forward, and there's this chain of causes and effects that occurs, and it brings the question: what's the foundation of that? There has to be some kind of something that gives this, that starts this movement, that produces this chain of causes and effects. And
what's the old argument that the Earth is on the back of a tortoise?
Yeah,
well, what
right.
does the tortoise stand on? Another tortoise.
Another tortoise, and this tortoise is
it's
all the way
down.
Tortoise is all the way down. Yeah, it doesn't work. Or imagine you had a row of dominoes, and the dominoes are falling as they go past you, and you say, "Hey, well, where did this start?" "Oh, it didn't start. They're just falling." Well, if there's nothing in this entire chain but dominoes, they shouldn't be falling, because dominoes don't have the power to initiate that. In the same way, nothing in the universe has the power of being in itself. So there has to be something that's the foundation of reality. There has to be a rock bottom foundation. And I could flesh that out more. There's a lot of things to be added to it, but that's the kind of reasoning.
Unfortunately, we're coming near the end again, just as we get started. But, I think that it's telling that the ones that will hold to the Big Bang, the Big Bang violates all known laws of physics.
Oh, absolutely.
And yet, that is what the evidence points to. And they say, well, what created the Big Bang? How did the Big Bang happen?
Well, I just saw it on a secular website today. I just saw a picture of a person with a T-shirt, and it said, "The Big Bang exploded out of nothingness." Now, this is supposed to be the scientific perspective. So nothing, for no reason, with no causation, no power whatsoever, produced the universe. It just, you're looking outside your window one day, and suddenly this gigantic building appears out of nowhere, and you're like, where did that come from? And the atheist is like the person who says, "Oh, don't worry about it. It just popped out of nowhere. We don't need to ask any more questions about it. What's the problem with that?" Well, of course there's a problem with that. It's totally against logic, but they can't maintain their system without admitting a first ultimate cause.
I mean, their argument, and they don't know how life began. I mean, they don't know how a cell comes into being. And, it really is almost like the parent saying that they found the child under a cabbage leaf. It just popped up one day.
And Darwin, I mean, the scientific community admits that they don't know the answer to that question. I mean, they claim a lot of things that I don't think they know, but they don't claim to know that. But like you said earlier, they claim they know it had to happen naturally.
I want to squeeze in one more thing here that you and I've discussed before. I think that the Christianity makes sense of the world in which we live. We see a greatness in man in terms of technology, art, music, things like this. And yet we see this fundamental sinfulness in man. This greatness is turned to destruction. We see that there is a beast within us and a self-destruction that is completely irrational. And you see it, especially in the atheists who claim to be rational. You see the self-destruction and things like this. Gene Roddenberry is a popularizer of an atheistic worldview, where he thought that technology and logic and things like this were going to bring about this utopia. And yet, what's the very first? You see that often, but then he slips up and he recognizes there's something wrong with man.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, the very first episode, talking about Star Trek.
Yeah.
The very first episode of Star Trek, in this great humanistic
Evangelism for geeks, by the way.
Yeah, right.
Go ahead.
This attempt to display this humanistic worldview, just like you said, that human progress, we're going to get rid of poverty and all these things, and yet in the first episode, the basic theme is that without some kind of restraint, human beings will lose all civilization and act like barbarians, and that's basically what happens in the episode. That Captain Kirk's good friend, gets this superpowers, basically, and it shows that him just completely losing all restraint and making himself a god and demanding worship, and it's a very good statement of human depravity, really.
And people know there's a problem. People know, when I was at your debate a couple of weeks ago, one of the members of the audience had the demon, the demon haunted world.
Oh, is it the Satan hypothesis? Is that what you're talking
No,
about?
the Carl Sagan,
Yeah.
I think it's the demon haunted world.
Yeah, that was his book.
We got a few seconds left here, and yet the funny thing is when you come to like Contact, Carl Sagan's book, he describes the aliens in messianic terms, that they're going to come and save us from ourselves.
Yeah.
They know there's a problem. They know there's good. They know there's evil, and yet they try to build those tortoises, one on top of another going to infinity.
Yep. Suppressing the truth.
And so there are many good arguments, but simply saying, if you had a religious experience, you'd know it. Or you can't disprove God. And then they laugh at you and say, well, I can't disprove the flying spaghetti monster.
Yeah. But
the Bible gives us great evidences. It describes the reality that, when Joel Layton says his wife has value, he's right.
Yeah.
It's creeping out from under the things here. We've got 30 seconds left, so I'm going to...
Can I make one?
Make it quick.
Yeah,
We got 30 seconds.
C.S. Lewis had a quote, "I believe in Christianity, just like I believe in the sun, not just because I see it, but because by it I see everything else."
Right. Well, it's been great having you with us. Unfortunately, we've run out of time again, but I hope that this helps flesh out some of the issues with atheism, and that Christianity is not irrational. Christianity is not backwards. And anyway, we'll be doing more in future episodes, and hope you can worship with us soon. Till next time, we wish you God's blessings. Good night.